Her son needed a donor, but his only match was her very billionaire ex, who had told her to abort the baby. Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Dr. Tom's Love Tales, your home to relax and enjoy the most touching love stories that will warm your heart and remind you that true love never dies. I'm your host, Dr. Tom, and before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from today. Also, if you're new here, quickly hit that subscribe button. And if you enjoy today's story, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your friends. Trust me, today's journey will touch places in your heart you forgot existed. Now, let's dive in. Tammie Johnson first noticed Caleb Winkler during her sophomore year economics lecture. Not because he was the most handsome guy in the room, though his sharp jawline and confident posture certainly caught attention, but because he was the only student brave enough to challenge Professor Williams on his outdated market theories. While other classmates sat in respectful silence, Caleb raised his hand with quiet determination. "Professor, with respect, your analysis doesn't account for the digital revolution changing consumer behavior patterns," Caleb said, his voice steady and measured. "Traditional economic models need updating for our generation." Tammie found herself leaning forward, captivated not by his boldness but by the thoughtful way he presented his argument. Here was someone who wasn't just smart, he was fearless about his intelligence. After class, she approached him near the lecture hall steps. "That was brave," she said, adjusting her backpack strap nervously. "Most students are too intimidated to speak up." Caleb turned, and when their eyes met, something electric passed between them. "Someone has to ask the hard questions," he replied, then smiled genuinely. "I'm Caleb." "Tammie," she responded, feeling her cheeks warm under his gaze. "Want to grab coffee? I'd love to hear more of your theories on economic disruption." That coffee date lasted 6 hours. They talked about everything: their childhood dreams, favorite books, fears about the future, and shared passion for changing the world through their respective fields. Tammie discovered that beneath Caleb's intense exterior was someone who listened deeply, remembered details, and asked thoughtful questions about her culinary aspirations. "You want to revolutionize how people experience food," Caleb observed, stirring his third espresso of the evening. "That's not just cooking, that's cultural transformation. And you want to democratize luxury experiences through technology," Tammie countered, impressed by his business vision, "making exclusive services accessible to everyone." As the evening grew late, Caleb walked her back to her dormitory. Under the soft glow of the campus streetlights, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent electricity through Tammie's entire body. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" he asked, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Yes," she whispered, already knowing this man would change everything. Their connection deepened over months of study sessions in the library, late-night conversations in coffee shops, and long walks across campus. During one particularly challenging organic chemistry study session, Tammie looked up to find Caleb watching her with such intensity that her breath caught. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You're beautiful when you're concentrating," he said softly, reaching across the table to intertwine their fingers. "I love watching your mind work." Their first kiss came 3 weeks later during a spring rain shower. They'd been caught without umbrellas, laughing as they ran for shelter under the library eaves. Breathless and soaked, they looked at each other and suddenly the laughter stopped. Caleb cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "Tammie," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," she breathed, already knowing what he was asking. When their lips met, it was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as years of unspoken longing poured out between them. The rain continued around them, but they were lost in their own world, finally crossing the line from friendship into something infinitely more precious. Where Tammie brought warmth and emotional intelligence to their relationship, Caleb contributed analytical thinking and unwavering focus. She softened his intensity, while he strengthened her confidence. Their physical connection was just as strong as their intellectual bond. Caleb's hand always finding the small of her back in crowded rooms, Tammie's fingers absently playing with his hair during late-night study sessions. By junior year, they were inseparable. Friends called them T.C., a nickname that stuck because they seemed to operate as one unit. They had developed their own language of touches, his thumb stroking her palm during boring lectures, her hand on his thigh when they sat together, gentle kisses pressed to temples and foreheads throughout their days. "You know what I love most about us?" Tammie asked one evening as they sat on the roof of his dormitory, her head resting on his shoulder, as they watched the sunset paint the California sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Tell me," Caleb replied, his arms tightening around her, lips brushing the top of her head. "We dream big together," she said softly, turning to face him. "Most couples talk about small things, weekend plans, what movie to watch. We talk about changing entire industries." Caleb turned to face her. "Well, that's because we're not most couples. We're building something extraordinary." Their senior year brought new pressures, but also deeper intimacy. They'd become lovers in every sense, their physical relationship as passionate and consuming as their emotional bond. Caleb worshipped Tammie's body with the same intensity he brought to everything else, learning every curve, every sensitive spot that made her gasp his name. Tammie gave herself completely, their lovemaking sometimes tender and slow, other times desperate and hungry. When Tammie's restaurant concept presentation received harsh criticism from her professor, Caleb held her as she cried, then spent hours helping her refine her business model, his hands massaging away the tension in her shoulders. When Caleb struggled with advanced calculus, Tammie created color-coded study guides while curled against his side, rewarding his progress with lingering kisses that often led to study breaks that lasted hours. "I got the internship," Tammie announced breathlessly, bursting into Caleb's room one spring afternoon. "The Culinary Institute in New York accepted my application." Caleb spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy before he set her down. "That's incredible. You're going to revolutionize New York's food scene." "And you?" she asked, her arms still wrapped around his neck. "Any word from the Los Angeles firms?" His expression grew more serious, hands settling on her waist. 3 offers came in yesterday, all good opportunities, but the Goldman Sachs position could fast-track my business plans by years. They held each other, celebrating their successes, but as the reality sank in, their kisses became more desperate, more urgent. That night, they made love with an intensity that bordered on desperation, as if they could somehow bind themselves together so tightly that distance would be powerless against them. Caleb moved inside her with reverent slowness, memorizing every sound she made, every tremor that ran through her body. Tammie clung to him, whispering his name like a prayer, both of them knowing without speaking that this might be one of their last nights like this. Afterward, they lay entwined, skin still flushed and hearts still racing, neither wanting to sleep and lose these precious hours together. "Promise me, we'll make this work," Tammie whispered against his chest, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. "I promise," Caleb replied, though even as he said the words, fear crept into his heart. New York and Los Angeles weren't just different cities. They were different worlds, different time zones, different lifestyles. Graduation day arrived with a mixture of triumph and heartbreak. Tammie watched Caleb walk across the stage to receive his summa cum laude honors, her heart swelling with pride but breaking simultaneously. After 4 years of shared dreams and passionate love, they were about to embark on separate journeys. "We'll make this work," Caleb insisted that evening as they walked hand in hand through the campus they'd called home, stopping frequently to kiss under familiar trees where they'd shared so many moments. "I know," Tammie agreed, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "We've overcome everything else together." The first few months were manageable. They scheduled nightly video calls, sent care packages filled with personal items, that still carried each other's scent, and planned visits every few weeks that were consumed with passionate reunions, desperate lovemaking that tried to make up for weeks of separation. But as months turned into a full year, the physical distance began taking its toll. Video calls couldn't replace Caleb's arms around her when Tammie had a bad day. Text messages couldn't substitute for the way she used to calm his anxiety by running her fingers through his hair. "I miss touching you" became a constant refrain in their conversations, accompanied by promises to visit soon that were increasingly broken due to work demands. The second year brought even greater challenges. Their carefully planned visits were frequently canceled, and when they did manage to see each other, there was always an underlying sadness, the knowledge that in a few days they'd be separated again. "We're growing apart," Tammie finally voiced what they'd both been feeling during one rare video call in their second year apart, her hand pressed to the screen as if she could touch his face. "We're not growing apart. We're growing up," Caleb replied, his own hand mirroring hers on his screen. "Growing into the people we dreamed of becoming." "But we dreamed of becoming those people together?" Tammie replied, tears threatening to spill. "I need you, Caleb. I need your touch, your presence, not just your voice through a screen." The conversation that would end their relationship came on a cold February evening during their third year apart. Neither planned it, but both felt the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on them. "We're holding each other back," Tammie said, the words cutting through both their hearts. "You should be building your life there, and I should be building mine here." "You're right," Caleb admitted, though every word felt like a betrayal of the love they'd shared, the nights they'd spent wrapped in each other's arms. "We're living half-lives, trying to maintain something that distance has changed." They sat in silence, both staring at their screens, memorizing each other's faces one last time. "I love you," Tammie whispered, tears now flowing freely. "I'll always love you." "I love you too," Caleb replied, his own voice breaking. "That's why we have to let each other go." "Maybe someday," she began. "Maybe someday," he agreed, "when we're ready, when we've become who we're meant to be." "Good luck, Caleb Winkler," Tammie said, forcing a smile through her tears. "Good luck, Tammie Johnson," he responded, his hand reaching toward the screen as if he could touch her face one more time. Finally, Tammie whispered goodbye and closed her laptop, ending not just the call but the greatest love either of them had ever known. 10 years had passed since that fateful night, and with it came transformations. They both had become powerhouses in their respective industries. Tammie Johnson now owned a chain of acclaimed restaurants across 5 major cities, her name synonymous with innovative cuisine that had earned her 2 James Beard nominations. Caleb Winkler, on the other end, had built a luxury car rental empire that spanned from Los Angeles to Dubai, his face gracing the covers of Forbes and Entrepreneur magazine as one of the youngest billionaires in America. The Grand Ballroom of Chicago's Palmer House Hilton buzzed with conversation as hospitality industry leaders mingled during the annual Innovation Summit's welcome reception. Tammie moved through the crowd with confident grace, her emerald dress catching the light as she discussed expansion opportunities with potential investors. She'd learned to command rooms the way she commanded kitchens, with quiet authority and magnetic presence. Across the vast space, Caleb stood surrounded by a small group of executives, his tailored charcoal suit and platinum watch speaking to the success he'd achieved. He was explaining the technology behind his company's flagship service when something made him glance up, scanning the room with an inexplicable sense of anticipation. Their eyes met across 300 people, and time stopped. Tammie's wine glass froze halfway to her lips, her conversation with a Seattle investor fading to white noise. Caleb's sentence died mid-word, his entire focus narrowing to the woman who had haunted his dreams for 10 years. She was more beautiful than his memories. Maturity had refined her features. Confidence had strengthened her posture. But those eyes were exactly as he remembered. Neither moved for a long moment, both processing the impossibility of this moment. Then Caleb excused himself from his group and began walking toward her, each step deliberate and purposeful. Tammie watched him approach, her heart hammering against her ribs with the same intensity she'd felt during their first college encounter. "Tammie Johnson," he said when he reached her, that familiar, confident smile spreading across his face, though she could see the vulnerability beneath it. "Caleb Winkler," she replied, somehow managing to keep her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Look at you, conquering the world." "Look who's talking," he said, his eyes drinking in every detail of her face. "I've been following your career. 2 James Beard nominations. You've surpassed every dream we ever talked about." The years melted away as they fell into conversation, their chemistry as electric as ever. Tammie found herself leaning closer when he spoke, unconsciously drawn to his familiar energy. Caleb's hand kept finding reasons to touch her arm when he laughed, the contact sending familiar fire through both of them. "I'm actually staying in LA for a month," Tammie mentioned, trying to sound casual as she sipped her wine, "opening a new location in Beverly Hills." Caleb's eyes lit up with unmistakable interest. "LA is my city now. Let me show you how much it's changed since our college days." "Well, I'd like that," she replied, and the promise in her voice made his pulse quicken. 3 days later, Caleb picked her up from her Beverly Hills hotel in a midnight blue Lamborghini that turned heads on Rodeo Drive. Tammie slid into the passenger seat, inhaling the scent of expensive leather mixed with his familiar cologne, a combination that brought back vivid memories of their passionate college nights. "Where are we going?" she asked, trying not to stare at how his hands looked gripping the steering wheel, memories of those same hands exploring her body flooding back unbidden. "Somewhere special," he said with that mysterious smile she'd fallen in love with years ago. He drove them up winding canyon roads to a private rooftop restaurant overlooking the entire city. The maitre d' led them to a table set for 2, candles flickering in the warm evening breeze, downtown LA sparkling like diamonds below them. "You planned this," Tammie said, settling into her chair as Caleb poured champagne. "The moment you said you'd be here for a month," he admitted, his eyes holding hers across the candlelit table. "I've thought about you every day for 10 years, Tammie. I wasn't going to waste this chance." Dinner conversation flowed effortlessly, catching up on achievements and challenges, but underneath ran a current of desire that had never dimmed. When Caleb reached across the table to brush his thumb along her knuckles, Tammie's breath caught. The simple touch ignited the same fire that had burned between them in college, but deeper now, enriched by maturity and the pain of loss. "Dance with me," he said when soft music began playing from hidden speakers. They moved together on the private terrace, Tammie's body fitting against his as if no time had passed. Caleb's hands splayed across her back, feeling the warmth of her skin through the silk of her dress. When she looked up at him, her lips parted slightly. He nearly lost all control. "God, I've missed you," he whispered against her ear, his breath warm on her neck. "Caleb," she breathed, her fingers tightening in his shirt. That first kiss was inevitable. Desperate, 10 years of longing poured into the connection of their lips. Tammie melted against him, her hands fisting in his hair as he deepened the kiss with hungry intensity. They were both breathless when they finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together. "Come home with me," he said, his voice rough with desire. "Yes," she whispered without hesitation. His penthouse overlooked the Pacific, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view, but neither of them noticed the scenery. They barely made it through the front door before Caleb pressed her against the wall, his mouth claiming hers with years of pent-up passion. Tammie's legs wrapped around his waist as he lifted her, carrying her to his bedroom where they made love with desperate intensity. Their bodies remembered each other perfectly, but this was different from their college passion, deeper, more profound. When Caleb moved inside her, Tammie felt complete for the first time in 10 years. They made love until dawn, talking between sessions about their years apart, their fears, their dreams that had never stopped including each other. The month that followed was a whirlwind of rediscovered passion. Caleb took her sailing on his yacht, where they made love under the stars on the open ocean. They spent weekends at his Napa Valley vineyard, walking through rows of grapes and talking until dawn about building an empire together. Every night ended, tangled in each other's arms, their physical connection as consuming as their emotional reunion. "I never stopped thinking about us," Caleb whispered one night as Tammie traced patterns on his bare chest, her hair spilling across his shoulder. "We're different people now," she replied softly, pressing a kiss to his collarbone. "Maybe that's what we needed." "Better people," he agreed, his fingers threading through her hair. "Ready for forever this time." 2 weeks before her month ended, Caleb surprised her with dinner at the vineyard. As they walked through the moonlit rows after their meal, he stopped suddenly and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "This isn't an engagement ring," he said quickly, seeing her eyes widen. "It's a promise ring. A promise that this time will be different, that we'll build something lasting together." The ring was perfect, a simple band with intertwined white and rose gold, elegant and timeless. As he slipped it onto her right hand, Tammie felt tears slip down her cheeks. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Say you'll try again with me," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "Say we can build the life we always dreamed of." "Yes," she breathed, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like promises and forever. As her month in LA drew to a close, both of them felt hope blooming in their chests. They had conference calls scheduled, travel plans discussed, and a real strategy for making long-distance work this time. They were older, wiser, more established in their careers. Nothing could tear them apart again. Tammie left for the airport with Caleb's ring on her finger and his promise of forever in her heart, completely unaware that in just a few hours, both their worlds would shatter in ways they never could have anticipated. That very night, everything would change. My family, before we continue, I noticed a lot of my viewers leave our story without subscribing, and honestly, I put a lot of efforts in creating these heartfelt stories. Please encourage me by quickly hitting that subscribe button right now, and share this story if you're already enjoying it. Now, let's continue. The call came at 11:47 p.m., just as Caleb was reviewing tomorrow's board meeting presentation in his downtown LA office. His assistant's voice was tense with urgency. "Mr. Winkler, we have a situation. Vincent Carrera needs his Lamborghini Aventador SVJ picked up immediately from his Malibu estate. He's flying to Monaco in the morning and insists on the personal touch." Caleb sighed, glancing at his watch. Carrera was their most demanding client, but also their most lucrative, a tech mogul whose endorsement had launched their luxury car rental service into the stratosphere. When Vincent Carrera called, Winkler Premium Rentals answered, regardless of the hour. "I'll handle it myself," Caleb said, grabbing his keys. As CEO, he still believed in leading by example, especially for their platinum-tier clients. The drive to Malibu took 40 minutes through empty canyon roads. Carrera's mansion perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, all glass and steel designed to impress. The billionaire met Caleb at the door, his expression unusually agitated. "Thank God you came personally," Carrera said, leading him to the garage where the sleek black Aventador SVJ waited. "I need this delivered to LAX's private terminal by 6 a.m. sharp. My pilot's already filing the flight plan." Caleb ran his hands over the vehicle's flawless exterior, performing the standard inspection his company required. Everything appeared perfect. The 500 machine was immaculate, as expected from their premium fleet. "Any issues I should know about?" Caleb asked, completing his checklist. "None at all," Carrera replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Just drove it yesterday. Purrs like a kitten." What Caleb couldn't know was that Carrera had discovered his son's drug addiction the previous day, along with evidence that the young man had been using the Lamborghini for drug runs. In a panic to distance himself from any potential scandal, Carrera had his private mechanic disable the electronic stability control system, intending to claim the car was stolen if authorities ever connected it to his son's activities. The tampering was subtle, virtually undetectable during a standard inspection, but it would prove catastrophic at high speeds. Caleb slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of Italian leather surrounding him. The engine roared to life with its signature aggressive growl, 12 cylinders of precision engineering responding to his touch. He'd driven hundreds of these vehicles over the years. This felt no different. The Pacific Coast Highway stretched before him, empty and inviting in the late-night darkness. Caleb allowed himself to think about Tammie as he drove, the promise ring he'd given her, their plans for the future. Tomorrow, he would call her, maybe fly to her city for the weekend. The future felt bright and full of possibility. He was reaching for his phone to text her when it happened. At 70 miles per hour, as he entered a sweeping curve, the electronic systems failed catastrophically. The stability control that should have kept the car planted suddenly cut out, the vehicle's sophisticated computer brain rendered useless by Carrera's tampering. The rear wheels lost traction, and despite Caleb's racing-level driving skills, the Lamborghini began to slide sideways. Time slowed as Caleb fought for control, his hands working the steering wheel with desperate precision. But the laws of physics had taken over, and the disabled safety systems left him helpless against momentum and speed. Natalia Martinez was walking home from her late-night shift at the downtown law firm where she worked as a junior associate. At 26, she was struggling to establish her career, often staying past midnight to research cases for senior partners who barely acknowledged her existence. The bus had dropped her at the highway crossing, leaving her with a 10-minute walk to her apartment. She never saw it coming. The out-of-control Lamborghini slammed into her with devastating force, her body thrown 15 feet onto the rocky shoulder. The sickening impact echoed through the canyon as Caleb's car finally came to rest against the guardrail, steam rising from its crumpled hood. Caleb stumbled from the wreckage, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, his mind reeling with shock and horror. He found Natalia unconscious, her left leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood pooling beneath her still form. "Oh God, he repeated, his hands shaking as he called 911. "Please, I need an ambulance. There's been an accident. A woman is badly hurt." The next hours passed in a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and medical personnel. Caleb rode in the ambulance with Natalia, holding her hand and repeating apologies to her unconscious form. At the hospital, he paced the waiting room like a caged animal, his expensive suit torn and bloodstained. "Are you family?" the surgeon asked, when he finally emerged from the operating room 6 hours later. "No, I'm the one who hit her," Caleb said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "How is she?" "She'll live, but the damage to her left leg is extensive. Multiple fractures, torn ligaments, possible nerve damage. She'll need months of surgery and rehabilitation. Whether she'll walk normally again." The doctor shrugged grimly. Caleb's world crumbled. This brilliant young woman's life had been destroyed because of a mechanical failure in his company's vehicle. The weight of responsibility crushed down on him like a physical force. When Natalia's mother, Sandra Martinez, arrived at the hospital, her grief quickly transformed into calculating rage. She recognized Caleb immediately from business magazines, her sharp eyes assessing his expensive watch, his designer clothes, the obvious wealth he represented. "You're that billionaire car rental guy," she said, her voice cold as winter. "Your fancy car just destroyed my daughter's future." "I'll pay for everything," Caleb said immediately. "All medical expenses, rehabilitation, lost wages, whatever she needs." Sandra's smile was predatory. "Money won't give her back her legs, will it? Money won't restart the legal career that's now finished before it began." 2 weeks later, as Caleb visited Natalia in her hospital room daily, bringing flowers and sitting by her bedside while she slept, Sandra Martinez made her move. She cornered him in the hospital corridor, her voice low and threatening. "Medical bills aren't enough," she hissed. "My daughter was going to be a lawyer, maybe a judge someday." Now look at her, trapped in that bed, facing years of surgeries, with no guarantee she'll ever walk properly again. What do you want? Caleb asked, though he dreaded the answer. Marriage, Sandra said bluntly. You marry my daughter, give her the life your recklessness stole from her, or we go to the media with this story. Billionaires, death trap cars destroy innocent lives. How long do you think your precious company will survive that headline? Caleb's blood turned to ice. You're talking about extortion. I'm talking about justice, Sandra replied. That Lamborghini was your responsibility. You want to keep this quiet? You take responsibility for the consequences. Marry Natalia, or watch your empire crumble in court battles and bad publicity. The threat was real and devastating. Caleb's company employed over 500 people across 3 countries. If Sandra carried out her threat, the lawsuits and media attention would destroy everything he'd built. Hundreds of families depended on the business for their livelihoods. But more than that, Caleb genuinely felt responsible. His company's vehicle had shattered this young woman's life. If marriage would give Natalia security and medical care while protecting his employees, wasn't that the right thing to do? I need time to think, he said. You have 24 hours, Sandra replied. Then we go public. That evening, Caleb sat in his empty penthouse, staring at the phone like it was a loaded weapon. He thought about Tammie's smile when he'd given her the promise ring, her plans to restructure her business so they could spend more time together. Everything they'd rebuilt over the past month would be destroyed by what he had to do. His phone rang before he could gather the courage to call her. Tammie's name lit up the screen, and her voice bubbled with excitement when he answered. Caleb, I have the most wonderful news. I just came from the doctor, and we're going to have a baby. The words hit him like a physical blow. A baby, their child, the family they'd dreamed of since college was finally becoming reality, and he was about to destroy it all. Caleb, are you there? Did you hear me? We're having a baby. He closed his eyes, feeling tears slip down his cheeks. Tammie, I heard you. Aren't you excited? I know we didn't plan this, but it feels like fate, doesn't it? Like everything's finally falling into place for us. See, what we had was real, Tammie, he said, his voice hollow with the weight of what he was about to do. But I can't have a family with you right now. Please, Tammie, you'll have to abort it. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was deafening. He could hear her breathing, could almost feel her heart breaking across the miles between them. What did you just say to me? Her voice was barely a whisper. I can't do this. I can't be what you need. I'm sorry. Caleb, what's wrong? What's happened? This isn't you talking. But he'd already hung up, his hands shaking as he set the phone aside. In her apartment, Tammie stared at her phone in shock, one hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. The man who'd promised her forever just days ago had asked her to abort their child. Both of them cried that night, Caleb in his Los Angeles penthouse, surrounded by luxury that felt meaningless, and Tammie in her home, clutching the promise ring he'd given her, while her world fell apart for the second time. That night, Tammie vowed she would raise her child alone, that she would never reach out to Alexander again, even if it meant her child never get to know their real father. Each believed they were protecting the other. Caleb thought he was sparing Tammie from the nightmare his life was about to become. Tammie thought she was protecting their child from a father who clearly didn't want them. Neither knew that Sandra Martinez's manipulation was just beginning, and that 3.5 years of lies and deception lay ahead before the truth would finally be revealed. The wedding was a small, grim affair in the courthouse downtown, attended only by Natalia's family and a handful of witnesses. Caleb stood at the altar in his charcoal suit, his face a mask of resigned duty as he exchanged vows with a woman he barely knew. Natalia sat in her wheelchair, pale but determined, her mother Sandra beaming with satisfaction in the front row. Do you, Caleb Winkler, take Natalia Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife? The judge asked. I do, Caleb replied, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. When he slipped the ring onto Natalia's finger, he thought of Tammie's promise ring, now returned to him in a package with no return address. She'd blocked his number, deleted all her social media accounts, and seemingly vanished from his life completely. The first year of marriage was a carefully constructed performance. Caleb moved Natalia into his penthouse, converting the guest room into a medical suite with state-of-the-art equipment. He hired the best physical therapists money could buy, genuinely hoping she would recover fully and they could eventually divorce as originally planned. But Natalia's progress was frustratingly slow. Every time the doctor suggested she should be regaining feeling in her legs, she would claim the pain was too severe. When therapists recommended more aggressive treatment, she would have setbacks that required bed rest for weeks. "The nerve damage is more extensive than we initially thought," she would tell Caleb, her dark eyes filled with what appeared to be genuine distress. "The doctors say it could take years." Sandra made regular visits, always with her hand extended for more money. "Natalia needs the experimental treatment in Switzerland," she would demand. "The specialist in Germany has a breakthrough therapy. This private clinic in Mexico has shown promising results." Caleb wrote check after check, each one feeling like another bar in his prison. By the second year, he'd spent over $2 million on treatments that seemed to yield no results. But what choice did he have? This was his responsibility, his burden to bear. Meanwhile, he made desperate attempts to reach Tammie, to at least know how she was doing. He called her restaurants, but was told she was unavailable. He hired private investigators, but they reported that she'd moved and left no forwarding address. He even flew to cities where her restaurants were located, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but she was never there. "Sir, we've traced her to several locations, but she seems to have completely changed her life," his lead investigator reported. "New city, new phone number, even closed all her previous bank accounts. It's like she wanted to disappear." What Caleb didn't know was that Tammie had taken precautions to ensure he could never find her. The pain of his rejection when she told him about their pregnancy had cut so deep that she'd systematically erased every connection between her old life and her new one. She'd moved across the country, started fresh, built her business empire under corporate structures that thrived even without her personal involvement. By the third year, Caleb had begun developing what seemed like genuine feelings for Natalia, which sometimes felt like acceptance of his fate. Her apparent courage in facing her disability, combined with their daily interactions as he cared for her, had created a bond he hadn't expected. She was intelligent, funny when the pain medications allowed, and seemed genuinely grateful for his sacrifice. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Natalia said one evening as he helped her into bed after a particularly difficult therapy session. "I know you love someone else. I caught you looking at that picture severally." "I made a commitment to you," Caleb replied, his voice gentle. "I'm not going anywhere." But late at night, when Natalia was asleep, he would stand at his penthouse windows and search social media for any trace of Tammie. He found nothing except a few old college photos that friends had posted, images that broke his heart with their reminders of what he'd lost. What Caleb couldn't see was the elaborate deception being maintained around him. The truth is, 1 year into their marriage, Natalia had been able to walk. So, for the 2 years that followed, she only left her wheelchair when she was certain Caleb was away on business trips or would have long days at work. She and Sandra had created an intricate schedule of his travel, ensuring she was always safely back in her wheelchair before he returned. Meanwhile, the financial demands never stopped. Sandra's requests became increasingly bold: a new house for herself, expensive medical equipment that was never used, treatments at facilities that existed only on paper. The Martinez family had built their entire lifestyle around Caleb's guilt and sense of responsibility. The experimental surgery in Sweden could be Natalia's last hope, Sandra would say, presenting forged medical documents and fabricated testimonials. but it costs $300. Each payment felt like another year added to his sentence. Caleb watched his friends marry for love, start families, build lives filled with genuine happiness while he remained trapped in a marriage built on obligation and deception. The discovery came entirely by accident on a rainy Thursday afternoon in their 4th year of marriage. Caleb had been scheduled to fly to Dubai for a major client meeting, but the flight was canceled due to mechanical issues. Instead of calling ahead, he decided to return home and surprise Natalia with lunch from her favorite restaurant. He entered the penthouse quietly, planning to surprise her, when he heard her voice from the bedroom, not the strained, pain-filled voice he'd grown accustomed to, but animated and energetic. "Mom, I'm tired of pretending I can't walk anymore," Natalia was saying into her phone, her back to the doorway as she stood by the window. "This charade is exhausting. I've been faking physical therapy sessions for 2 years." Caleb froze in the hallway, his blood turning to ice. "Our plan to make him love me isn't working," she continued, pacing back and forth on legs that moved perfectly normally. "He's still clearly in love with this Tammie woman. I see him looking at old photos when he thinks I'm asleep. I'm tired of this lie." "You can't give up now," Sandra's voice crackled through the phone speaker. "We've built a good life from this situation. The money keeps coming, and you have security." "But I want real love, not this guilt-based marriage," Natalia replied. "He takes care of me out of duty, not affection. I can see it in his eyes every day." Caleb stepped into the doorway, his presence casting a shadow across the room. Natalia turned, her face draining of all color as she saw him standing there. "Caleb," she whispered, dropping the phone. "You're supposed to be in Dubai." "Flight was canceled," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Interesting conversation you were having." The confrontation that followed was volcanic. 3.5 years of suppressed rage, guilt, and loss exploded as Caleb realized the extent of the manipulation. Every sacrifice he'd made, every dollar he'd paid, every day he'd spent caring for someone who had been deceiving him completely. "How long?" he demanded, his voice shaking with fury. 2 years, Natalia admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I could walk after the first year, but Mom said we should wait longer, make sure you were completely committed. She knew it would all end if I confessed I could walk." "Get out," Caleb said, his voice cutting through her sobs. "Pack your things and get out of my house." "Caleb, please, I do care about you." This started as manipulation, but I genuinely— "Get out," he roared, his composure finally cracking. "Get out before I call the police and have you arrested for fraud." Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Tammie Johnson was building a different kind of life. Her son Leo had just turned 4, a beautiful boy with Caleb's stubborn chin and her warm eyes. Their small apartment was filled with the controlled chaos of single motherhood, toys scattered across the living room, children's books stacked on every surface, artwork covering the refrigerator. "Tell me about Daddy again," Leo said as Tammie tucked him into bed, his small hand clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Tammie's heart clenched, as it did every time he asked this question. She'd crafted careful stories about Leo's father, truthful but edited versions that portrayed Caleb as a good man who simply couldn't be part of their lives. "Daddy is very smart and very successful," she said, smoothing his dark hair. "He builds businesses that help people, and he works very hard. He has your eyes, that same determined look when you're concentrating on your puzzles." "Why doesn't he live with us?" Leo asked, the question that broke her heart anew each time. "Sometimes adults have to make very difficult choices," Tammie replied, kissing his forehead. "Daddy and Mommy both love you very much, but we can't be together right now. Will I ever meet him?" Tammie closed her eyes, feeling the familiar ache of loss and longing. "I don't know, sweetheart, but you are loved, so very loved, by both of us." After Leo fell asleep, Tammie would sit at her kitchen table with her laptop, building her restaurant empire one location at a time. Her business had exploded in success, partly due to her drive to create financial security for Leo, and partly because cooking was the only thing that quieted the pain in her chest. She'd built walls around her heart so high that she'd turned down every romantic advance, every dinner invitation, every attempt by well-meaning friends to set her up. Leo was her world, her purpose, her reason for getting up each morning and pushing forward. But late at night, when exhaustion finally claimed her, she would sometimes dream of Caleb's hands in her hair, his voice whispering her name, the life they might have had together. She would wake with tears on her cheeks and the thought of their last night together, how he whispered forever about his promise ring and how she had tearfully returned it. Neither Caleb nor Tammie knew that fate was already setting the stage for their reunion, that their son would soon face a crisis that would force them back into each other's lives. The years of separation and deception were about to end, but the healing would prove far more complicated than either could have imagined. My family. This story gets even more intense. Make sure you're subscribed now so you don't miss how this unfolds. The dinosaur-themed birthday party was in full swing in Tammie's backyard. 4-year-old Leo racing around with his friends, while parents chatted over coffee and cake. Colorful balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, and the sound of children's laughter filled the afternoon air. Leo wore his favorite T-Rex costume, roaring with delight as he chased his best friend David around the swing set. "Make a wish, birthday boy," Tammie called out, lighting the candles on his dinosaur cake. Leo's eyes sparkled with excitement as he ran toward the table, his cheeks flushed from playing. But halfway across the yard, something was wrong. Leo's steps became unsteady, his small hand reaching out for support that wasn't there. His rosy cheeks suddenly drained of color, leaving his skin waxy and pale. Tammie watched in growing alarm as her son's eyes rolled back, his little body crumpling to the grass like a marionette with cut strings. "Leo!" she screamed, dropping the lighter and rushing to his side. His body was completely limp, his breathing shallow and irregular. The other parents gathered around, someone calling 911 while Tammie cradled her unconscious son against her chest. "Come on, baby. Wake up for mommy," she whispered, stroking his dark hair with trembling fingers. His lips had taken on a frightening blue tinge, and his pulse felt weak and thready under her fingertips. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical equipment. Leo remained unconscious as paramedics worked over him, checking vitals and starting an IV in his tiny arm. Tammie held his hand, talking to him constantly, willing him to open his eyes and smile at her the way he had just minutes earlier. At Children's Hospital, Leo was whisked away to the emergency department while Tammie paced the waiting room, her party dress now wrinkled and stained with grass. Hours crawled by as doctors ran test after test, their faces growing more serious with each result. Dr. Patricia Williams finally emerged from the examination room, her expression grave. She was a pediatric hematologist with 20 years of experience, but Tammie could see the weight of difficult news in her eyes. "Miss Johnson, please sit down," Dr. Williams said gently, leading Tammie to a quiet corner of the waiting room. "What's wrong with my son?" Tammie asked, her voice barely steady. "Leo has a rare blood disorder called aplastic anemia," the doctor explained. "His bone marrow has essentially stopped producing healthy blood cells. Without treatment, his condition will deteriorate rapidly." The words hit Tammie like physical blows. "What kind of treatment? Surgery? Chemotherapy? Whatever he needs, I'll pay for it." Dr. Williams shook her head sadly. "Medication can help manage symptoms temporarily, but Leo needs a bone marrow transplant. Without a genetic match from a family member, we're looking at searching the National Registry, which could take months. Leo doesn't have months." "How long does he have?" Tammie whispered, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Weeks, maybe days without intervention. The collapse today was his body's way of telling us that his blood can no longer carry enough oxygen to sustain him. We need to find a donor immediately." "Test me," Tammie said immediately, standing up with desperate determination. "I'm his mother. I'll be a match." I have to be a match. Dr. Williams nodded gently. Of course, we'll run the compatibility tests right away. But Ms. Johnson, while parent-child matches do occur, they're not automatic. We need to prepare for other possibilities. I'll be a match, Tammie repeated firmly, as if saying it could make it true. I have to be. The blood draw took only minutes, but the wait for results felt like an eternity. Tammie sat beside Leo's bed, holding his small hand and whispering promises. Mommy's going to save you, baby. Mommy's going to make you all better. Leo drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing aided by an oxygen mask that made him look impossibly fragile. Each time he opened his eyes, Tammie smiled brightly and told him how much she loved him, never letting him see the terror consuming her from the inside. Dr. Williams returned 3 hours later, and Tammie knew immediately from her expression that the news wasn't good. I'm so sorry, Ms. Johnson, the doctor said quietly. You're not a compatible match for Leo. The words shattered Tammie's world. That's not possible. I'm his mother. How can I not be a match? Bone marrow compatibility is complex. Dr. Williams explained gently. It's not like blood type. The genetic markers we need don't always pass from parent to child in the right combination. Tammie felt the room spinning around her. Then what do? What are our options? We need to test other family members immediately. Does Leo have a father? Siblings? Grandparents? The closer the genetic relationship, the better our chances of finding a match. Tammie's heart stopped. Leo's father, the man who had told her to abort their child, the man who had disappeared from their lives when they needed him most. Her parents were both deceased, and she was an only child. There was no one else. His father, she whispered, the words feeling like broken glass in her throat. Can you contact him? Time is critical here, Miss Johnson. Every hour counts. Tammie stared at her son's pale face, knowing that swallowing her pride was the only chance of saving his life. I'll call him. That night, as Leo slept in his hospital bed connected to monitors and IV lines, Tammie sat in the uncomfortable chair beside him, staring at her phone. She'd carried Caleb's business card in her wallet for 4 years, never quite able to throw it away despite the pain associated with his memory. Her pride screamed against making this call. This was the man who had asked her to abort their child, who had disappeared from their lives when they needed him most. But looking at Leo's pale face against the white hospital pillow, pride meant nothing compared to her son's survival. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number, each digit feeling like a betrayal of the walls she'd built around her heart. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Part of her hoped he wouldn't answer, that she could tell herself she'd tried. Caleb Winkler, his familiar voice answered, and her breath caught in her throat. Caleb, she managed, her voice cracking on his name. There was a long pause. Tammie, is that you? How did you get this number? I kept your card, she admitted, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Caleb, I vowed I'd never contact you again, but our son, he's dying. The silence on the other end stretched so long she thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained with emotion. Our son? Leo, she whispered. His name is Leo. He's 4 years old, and he has your eyes, your stubborn chin. He collapsed during his birthday party today. The doctors say he has aplastic anemia, that he needs a bone marrow transplant immediately. Jesus, Caleb breathed, and she could hear him moving, probably pacing the way he always did when he was processing difficult information. I tested first, Tammie continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. I was so sure I could save him myself, but I'm not a match. The doctors say without a genetic match from family, he has weeks, maybe days. You're his father, Caleb. You might be the only one who can save him. What hospital? Caleb's voice had changed, becoming focused and determined. Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, room 412. I'm coming now, he said without hesitation. I'll catch the first flight out. But Tammie, why didn't you tell me about him before? The question hung between them. loaded with 4 years of pain and misunderstanding. "Don't you remember any more that you told me to abort him?" she said quietly. "I thought you didn't want us?" Another long silence. "I'll be there in 6 hours," he said finally. "Don't let anything happen to him before I get there." The line went dead, leaving Tammie alone with her sleeping son and the knowledge that the man who had shattered her world was about to walk back into it. Caleb arrived at the hospital looking like he'd run the entire distance from Los Angeles. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from the red-eye flight. He'd barely slept on the plane, his mind reeling with the knowledge that he had a son, a child who was fighting for his life. Tammie met him in the hallway outside Leo's room, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. 4 years had changed them both. She looked tired but stronger, her success evident in her confident posture despite the current crisis. He looked older, more weathered, as if he'd been carrying a heavy burden. "He's sleeping," she said quietly, leading him toward the room. "The doctors have been running tests all night." Caleb stopped at the doorway, his breath catching as he saw the small figure in the hospital bed. Leo was indeed unmistakably his son, the same dark hair, the same determined set to his jaw even in sleep, the same long fingers that Caleb remembered from his own childhood photos. "My God," he whispered, stepping closer to the bed. "He's beautiful, Tammie." Leo stirred at the sound of voices, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw the stranger standing beside his mother, his gaze sharpened with curiosity rather than fear. Those were definitely Caleb's eyes, intelligent, assessing, missing nothing. "Who's that, Mommy?" Leo asked, his voice hoarse from the oxygen mask he'd been wearing. Tammie looked at Caleb, then back at their son. "Leo, this is your daddy." Leo's eyes widened, studying Caleb with the intense focus of a 4-year-old encountering something momentous. "You're really my daddy?" Caleb moved closer to the bed, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch his son's small hand. "Yes, I am. I'm so sorry it took me so long to meet you." "Mommy said you were very busy building businesses," Leo said with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. "Are you going to help me get better?" "I'm going to try, buddy," Caleb replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to do everything I can." Dr. Williams entered the room with a team of technicians, ready to draw blood for the compatibility testing. "Mr. Winkler, we need to run some tests to see if you're a match for Leo." The next few hours were a tense waiting period as lab technicians analyzed Caleb's blood against Leo's. Tammie and Caleb maintained a careful distance from each other, both focused entirely on their son, who had taken to his father with surprising ease. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Leo asked Caleb during one of his more alert moments. "I love dinosaurs," Caleb replied, settling into the chair beside the bed. "What's your favorite?" "T-Rex, because they're the strongest," Leo said with conviction. "Mommy says I'm strong like a T-Rex too." "Your mommy's right," Caleb agreed, glancing at Tammie. "You're the strongest little boy I've ever met." When Dr. Williams returned with the test results, her face carried the first hopeful expression Tammie had seen in days. "Mr. Winkler, you're a perfect match," she announced. "We can schedule the transplant procedure for tomorrow morning, if you're willing to proceed." "Yes," Caleb said immediately, not even pausing to consider. "Whatever he needs." "The procedure will take several hours, and there are risks involved for both of you," Dr. Williams continued. "But given Leo's condition, this is our best option." Caleb looked at his son, then at Tammie. "When do we start?" That night, as Leo slept between procedures and preparation, Caleb and Tammie maintained their vigil on opposite sides of his bed. The years of pain and separation seemed to fade in the face of their shared love for this brave little boy who had brought them back together. "Thank you," Tammie whispered across the bed, "for coming, for this." "He's my son," Caleb replied simply. "There's nothing I wouldn't do for him, or for you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history and the possibility of healing. Tomorrow would bring the medical procedure that could save their son's life, but tonight was about a father finally meeting his child and two broken hearts beginning to remember what they once meant to each other. Leo stirred in his sleep, his small hand reaching out unconsciously. Both parents moved to take it, their fingers touching for the first time in 4 years as they held their son's hand together, united in love and hope for his recovery. The next day came with its own promises. The bone marrow transplant procedure took 8 hours, with Caleb lying in the adjoining room as doctors extracted the life-saving cells from his hip bone. Despite the pain and discomfort, he remained focused on one thing: saving his son's life. Through the thin wall separating them, he could hear the medical team working on Leo, their voices calm but urgent, as they prepared the tiny boy's body to receive his father's bone marrow. Tammie waited in the family lounge, pacing the small room like a caged animal. Every few minutes, a nurse would update her on the procedure's progress, but the hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. When Dr. Williams finally emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, Tammie's heart nearly stopped. The transplant was successful. The doctor announced with a tired but genuine smile, "Leo's body has accepted Caleb's bone marrow beautifully. His vital signs are strong, and we're already seeing positive indicators." Tammie collapsed into a chair, tears of relief streaming down her face. "He's going to be okay? It will take time for his body to fully recover and start producing healthy blood cells consistently, but yes, we have every reason to be optimistic. Leo is a fighter, just like his father." The first few days were critical, with Leo drifting in and out of consciousness as his body began the slow process of healing. Caleb, despite his own recovery needs, refused to leave the hospital, setting up a makeshift office in the family lounge so he could work while staying close to his son. Tammie watched this transformation with amazement. The man she remembered as driven and career-focused had become completely devoted to their child's well-being. He learned Leo's medication schedule by heart, asked detailed questions about every aspect of his care, and spent hours simply sitting by their son's bedside reading dinosaur books in a soft voice. His white blood cell count is improving daily, Dr. Williams reported during one of her evening rounds. Leo's responding even better than we hoped. By the end of the first week, Leo was awake more often, his color returning and his appetite slowly improving. The awkward dynamic between his parents, however, remained unchanged. They took shifts at his bedside, coordinating schedules through polite text messages, maintaining careful distance from each other while both pouring all their attention into their son. "Mommy, why don't you and Daddy talk to each other?" Leo asked one afternoon, his voice still weak but curious. "You only talk about my medicine and stuff." Tammie glanced at Caleb, who was organizing Leo's collection of get-well cards. "Adults sometimes have complicated feelings, sweetheart, but we both love you very much." "I know that," Leo said with 4-year-old logic, "but you both look sad when you think I'm not watching." 2 weeks after the transplant, with Leo's recovery progressing steadily, Caleb approached Tammie in the hospital corridor. She was coming back from the cafeteria with coffee, looking exhausted from weeks of hospital vigils. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Really talk. Leo's getting stronger, and he's starting to ask questions about us that I don't know how to answer." Tammie looked up at him, seeing something different in his eyes. Not the careful politeness of recent weeks, but the vulnerability she remembered from their college days. "There's a coffee shop across the street. Leo's sleeping, and the nurses can watch him for an hour." They sat across from each other in the small cafe, both holding steaming cups they barely touched. For several minutes, neither spoke, the weight of 4 years of pain and misunderstanding hanging between them. "The night you told me about the pregnancy," Caleb began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I was planning my wedding to another woman." Tammie's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "What?" Caleb's hands trembled as he told her everything. The accident with the tampered Lamborghini, Natalia's injury, Sandra's manipulation and ultimatums, the forced marriage built on lies and extortion. With each revelation, Tammie's expression shifted from shock to disbelief to something resembling understanding. "I tried to reach you," he continued, tears now flowing freely. I called hundreds of times, but you'd blocked my number. I hired private investigators, flew to your city twice, but you disappeared completely. I never stopped looking, Tammie. I never stopped loving you. Tammie sat in stunned silence, processing 4 years of assumed betrayal crumbling into a story of sacrifice and manipulation. You could have told me the truth that night. You could have explained. How? Caleb's voice cracked. You were glowing with happiness about the pregnancy. How could I drag you into that nightmare? Sandra was threatening to destroy my company, put 500 employees out of work. I thought I was protecting you. By breaking my heart? Tammie's own tears started. By making me believe you didn't want our child? By making the hardest choice I've ever made. He replied, I chose to let you hate me rather than watch you suffer through years of Natalia's family's threats and manipulation. I thought you'd be better off building a life without me. I named him Leo, Tammie said softly, her voice breaking, after your grandfather, the one you used to tell me stories about in college. Caleb's composure shattered completely. You remembered? I remembered everything, Tammie admitted. Even when I tried to forget, even when I hated you, I couldn't erase us. I told Leo stories about his father, about how smart and dedicated you were, how you cared about helping people through your business. I never told him you abandoned us because deep down, I never believed the man I loved could really do that. They sat in silence, years of pain finally exposed to light. Across the street, their son was recovering from a life-threatening illness, brought back from the brink by his father's willingness to sacrifice for him. I'm sorry, Caleb whispered. I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you, for the years I missed with Leo. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was a coward. You were trapped, Tammie said, reaching hesitantly across the table to touch his hand. We were both trapped by circumstances we couldn't control. The healing wasn't instant or easy. They started slowly, coffee conversations that stretched into long talks about their lost years. Caleb learned about Leo's first steps, his first words, which had been Dada, a fact that made Caleb cry, his love for dinosaurs, and his fear of thunderstorms. He has night terrors sometimes, Tammie explained as they watched Leo sleep in his hospital bed. He talks about looking for someone in his dreams, someone who's supposed to be there but isn't. He was looking for me, Caleb said, his voice heavy with guilt. All this time, he was looking for his father. Tammie watched Caleb transform around their son, patient when Leo was cranky from medications, playful during the boring hours of recovery, completely devoted to learning everything about the little boy he'd missed knowing. She saw glimpses of the man she'd fallen in love with in college, but deeper now, shaped by loss and sacrifice. Tell me about the dinosaur phase, Caleb asked one afternoon, settling into the chair beside Leo's bed with a new book about pterodactyls. It started when he was 2, Tammie replied, smiling at the memory. He saw a documentary and became obsessed. He can name every dinosaur species and their eating habits. Daddy, did you know the T-Rex had teeth as big as bananas? Leo piped up, having been listening to their conversation. I did not know that, Caleb replied seriously. That's incredible. You're like a dinosaur scientist. Paleontologist, Leo corrected with 4-year-old pride. That's what I'm going to be when I grow up. That's a great goal, Caleb said. Maybe we can visit some dinosaur museums together when you're feeling better. Really? Mommy, did you hear? Daddy wants to take me to see dinosaurs. Tammie felt her heart clench with emotion. This was what she'd dreamed of during those lonely years, watching Caleb be the father she'd always known he could be. 3 weeks after the transplant, as Leo's strength continued to improve, he asked the question that broke both his parents' hearts. Daddy, why does Mommy cry when she looks at you? Caleb and Tammie exchanged glances across his bed. They'd thought they'd been hiding their emotional turmoil, but children saw everything. Sometimes grown-ups have sad feelings about things that happened before, Caleb said carefully, but those sad feelings don't mean we don't love each other. Do you love Mommy? Leo asked, with the directness only children possessed. "Yes," Caleb replied without hesitation, looking directly at Tammie. "I love your mommy very much." "Do you love Daddy?" Leo asked Tammie. Tammie felt tears threatening again. "Yes, sweetheart, I love your daddy very much." "Then why can't we all live together, like a real family?" Leo asked, the question they'd all been thinking but hadn't dared voice. Caleb reached across the bed to take Tammie's hand. "Maybe we can, buddy. Maybe we can work on becoming a real family." "I want to try again," Caleb said quietly that evening after Leo had fallen asleep. "Not just for Leo, but for us. If you'll have me." Tammie studied his face, older now, marked by years of guilt and longing, but still achingly familiar. "It won't be easy. I spent 4 years learning to live without you." "I spent 4 years learning I can't live without you," he replied. "We're different people now, but maybe that's what we needed. Maybe we're finally ready for forever." As Leo continued his recovery, surrounded by both his parents working together to care for him, the foundation for their rebuilt family began to take shape. They were no longer the naive college sweethearts who'd been torn apart by distance and circumstances. They were parents who'd found their way back to each other through the deepest pain, ready to write a new chapter of their love story. 6 months had passed after Leo's successful recovery, and today, Tammie's garden was transformed into an intimate wedding venue. White roses climbed the wooden arbor where she and Caleb would exchange vows, while string lights created a warm glow in the late afternoon sun. The guest list was small, close friends, a few family members, and Leo's medical team, who had become like extended family during their hospital stay. Leo stood at the altar in his miniature tuxedo, clutching the ring pillow, with the seriousness of someone entrusted with the most important job in the world. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his cheeks held the healthy flush that had returned as his strength rebuilt. Dr. Williams sat in the front row, tears already gathering in her eyes as she watched the family she'd helped save come together. "Are you ready, buddy?" Caleb asked, adjusting Leo's tiny bow tie. "I've been ready forever, Daddy," Leo replied with 5-year-old confidence. When the music began and Tammie appeared at the garden gate, Caleb's breath caught. She wore a simple ivory dress that moved like silk in the gentle breeze, her hair flowing over her shoulders. But it was her radiant smile that stopped his heart, the same smile that had captivated him in that Stanford lecture hall so many years ago. Leo walked down the aisle first, carefully carrying the rings with the dedication of someone who understood their importance. Behind him, Tammie moved with quiet grace, her eyes never leaving Caleb's face. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we gather today to witness the union of 2 souls who have weathered storms and found their way back to each other. Their vows were different from the traditional promises. These were words born from pain and growth, from separation and reunion." "Caleb," Tammie said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes, "I promise to love you not as the boy I knew in college, but as the man you've become. I promise to trust in our love even when circumstances try to tear us apart. I promise to fight for us, always." "Tammie," Caleb replied, his hand shaking as he held hers, "I promise to choose you every day, in every decision I make. I promise to never let pride or fear keep me from telling you the truth. I promise to be the father Leo deserves and the partner you need for all the days of my life." When they kissed as husband and wife, Leo cheered loudly, causing the small gathering to burst into laughter and applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, Leo between them, holding both their hands, they weren't naive college sweethearts starting fresh. They were battle-tested partners who had learned that love sometimes requires sacrifice, sometimes demands forgiveness, and always needs courage. "We did it, Mommy," Leo whispered as they posed for photos. "We're a real family now." "We always were, sweetheart," Tammie replied, kissing the top of his head. "We just had to find our way home." 1 year later, the dining room of their new home was filled with the comfortable chaos of family life. Leo's artwork covered the refrigerator. His dinosaur collection took up an entire bookshelf, and the kitchen island bore the evidence of Tammie's latest culinary experiments. Caleb worked from his home office now, having restructured his business to prioritize time with his family. "Daddy, watch this," Leo called out, demonstrating his latest gymnastics move, a cartwheel that was more enthusiasm than technique. "That was amazing," Caleb replied, scooping his son up for a hug. "You're getting so strong." At dinner, Leo chattered about his first day of kindergarten, while Tammie and Caleb exchanged the knowing glances of parents who had learned to treasure ordinary moments. The medical crisis seemed like a distant nightmare now, replaced by bedtime stories, weekend adventures, and the simple joy of being together. "Tell me again how you and Mommy met," Leo requested as Caleb tucked him into bed. "Well," Caleb began, settling into the familiar ritual, "Mommy was the smartest, most beautiful girl at Stanford University, and I was lucky enough that she noticed me." Later, as Tammie and Caleb sat on their porch swing, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Leo hadn't gotten sick?" Tammie asked, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder. "Sometimes," he admitted, his fingers threading through her hair. "But I think we would have found our way back to each other eventually. Some loves are just meant to be. Even when they're tested by impossible circumstances?" "Especially then," Caleb replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The strongest love is the kind that survives being broken and chooses to heal." Their story had taught them that love sometimes means letting go, as they had done in college when distance threatened to diminish their dreams. Sometimes it means making devastating sacrifices, as Caleb had done to protect others, even at the cost of his own happiness. And sometimes, when life offers a second chance, love means fighting back with everything you have. For anyone facing their own impossible situations, their journey offered hope. Love lost can be love found again. Hearts broken can heal stronger than before. And families torn apart by circumstances beyond their control can find their way back to each other when courage meets forgiveness, and when two people choose to believe that some bonds are truly unbreakable. As they sat together under the starlit sky, their son sleeping peacefully inside, Caleb and Tammie knew they had found their forever, not the fairy tale version they'd dreamed of in college, but something deeper and more resilient. They had found the kind of love that survives everything life can throw at it and emerges stronger, wiser, and infinitely more precious. They were home. My family, if this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear that broken things can be made whole again. Subscribe for more stories of hope, and comment below with your own second chance story. You are loved, you are worthy, and your story matters too.